I was among a group of children from the East End, from the local Sunday school, I suppose it was really, but it's non-denominational, who were not, no arrangement was made for them to go to be evacuated during the war, and this was already 1940. And but the two ladies, the Leicester sisters, arranged for a group of children from the East End who'd attended the local Sunday school to be evacuated to Hertfordshire. And she'd phoned round, tried to get as many people as possible interested, and finally ended up with getting the Duke of Bedford's mother to loan her the fishing lodge at Sarratt in Hertfordshire, but it's really called the Mill House, is the house it's called. And so we were all loaded onto a truck with the air raid warning starting to go off on I forget the day it was, it's September 1940, I think. Anyway, it was quite late in the year, and arriving there to find total chaos. A lot of children sort of upset at being taken away from home. Facilities were very, very poor. Nobody had lived in the house for a number of years, but it was a very beautiful house, set in its own garden and everything. Eventually things did settle down, and we got one teacher and who was a man, and a second teacher who was an opera singer called Hulbert. I don't know if she's traceable, but virtually there was no education to speak of. Most of it was just running wild in the countryside. It was building camps in the wood. It was swimming, because it had two rivers running through the grounds. Swimming in the river, learning to swim, just doing all sorts of strange and wonderful things which you didn't know about in London, which was climbing apple trees and picking apples and all the rest of that sort of stuff, which was really such a difference to the life we'd known. And I suppose that was where it all came from, the beginning of wanting to be, well, not wanting to be in the country, but being aware of being in the country, being aware of everything that was going on around you, about trees and the river and having adventures. I had a particular friend called Terry Searle, and we were the only two boys who had tricycles, and we used to have races up and down the drive to the house, and we used to get up to all sorts of things. We actually got into trouble quite a few times, you know, sort of trying to catch salmon in the river and all sorts of stuff, and building camps in the wood which we refused to leave when it got dark, things like that, you know. But the education, there was a man, and I can't remember his name now, but he did eventually teach me to read. But that was right near the end of my time up there. I learned to read when I was about 10. But I was drawing all the time. This was the thing. It was all these lurid details of the Blitz and the bombing on London, and just completely flat. And I can remember really clearly of doing these drawings of bombers coming over, and big explosions and bombing and all that. And I can remember that so clearly. But I think that was, as I say, the beginning of being really aware of how different my life could be, or you know, or might be. But I wasn't, not at 10. I couldn't know that. But later, just the connection was that when I went back to London, and I was about 13 to 15. There used to be the opportunity to do this sort of summer camp, where you were sent off to the countryside and lived in ex-army camps with a load of other kids from the East End and London. And I used to do that every year for 3 or 4 years, because I couldn't wait for the summer holidays to come and get packed off to, and in Sussex, it was a place called Cooper's Farm in Sussex. But that obviously was a lot later. But that was the second part of my wanting to, you know, well, I don't know, I didn't want, I say I wanted, but I wasn't aware enough to know those things, you know, to understand that this was a really, you know, something that was going to be very important to me eventually, you know. So I mean, I only have really just the most fantastic memories of my childhood, which might have started off thinking that this wasn't going to be very good because of the war and because of a lack of everything. And we had a great thing at the meal house that at the end of the war we'd have white bread. And that's what all the kids used to talk about, you know. And but we were very well fed, really, for considering the shortages. But of course, when you're in the country, there were more opportunities to get decent food than you would in London. I mean, people queuing up and waiting hours and hours in queues for getting an orange or something was mad. But yeah, as I say, it's the memory of that 5 years is so strong in me, and if people said that must have been terrible for you, no, of course it wasn't terrible. It was the most idyllic existence you could have as a child. It was just wonderful. Yeah. Right. So I knew that I'd have to go do the national service, although I was still working in Romford at the time in the garage, and so you went along for your interview and your medical, and they said, well, if you agree to sign on for 3 years instead of 2, you get 30%, 35% more money. And I thought, well, I didn't have anything to mess around, so I thought, well, I signed for 3 years. You were obliged to do 2, but if you signed for 3, you got the extra cash. So I thought, oh, I'll do that. And even at the Cardington camp, which is where you first went to get your kit and do your basic thing, and then you were decided what you were going to do, whether you were going to be a mechanic or an aircraftsman or an orderly, even, you know, so it went all sort of great various, any kind of job that you'd have in the army. Even there, I met 1 or 2 people who were really interested. I met this guy called Frank Blacker, who was a sort of an apprentice of some kind of movie making, and he was really interesting. I got really friendly with him. We both ended up in the same place in West Kirby, near Liverpool, which was our 12 weeks basic training. And everybody said how horrid it was going to be, you know, how they treated you badly and they made you cut the grass with scissors and they made you do... And you know, none of that happened to me. Though I did have a very unfortunate experience with the Lance Corporal. I forget what it went off, but it was something to do with going to the... I'd had a job to do, which when I was finished, I could then go off to the NAFI and get a drink and some cigarettes. And so then I fell out this, oh no, he said something to me, and then I sort of said something which I thought he couldn't hear, but he did hear me. And so then he said, well, I can put you on a charge, or I can send you to the cookhouse and you can ask for the worst possible job you can get at the cookhouse. So I went to the cookhouse, and the chef said, well, what, you know, I'll tell you what you can do. You can clean the custard vats. Now, I'm missing to tell you, I hate custard. I really can't stand custard, but whether it was to do with this or not, I don't know. But you had to climb in. They were huge, great cauldrons, because this camp was huge. It was a basic training camp. And I had to climb in and scrape the dried custard off of the inside of the vat. And that was what he said was the worst job he could give me in the cookhouse, for doing that. So anyway, it was better than being put on a charge, because at least you got it and you got it out of the way. You didn't end up, you know, doing time in the glass house or whatever. So it was straightforward. But no, apart from that, it was pretty good. I thought it was really good. Basic training was easy. You only had to pay attention and do what you were told and be sensible. The worst thing was we had how well you coped with gas. And you had to be, with no gas mask, you had to go in one end of this small building, I suppose about 30 foot long, and they released gas, and then you had to run through and come out the other end to see, you know, how effective it was on you, how badly you reacted to the situation. You weren't given a gas mask, you just ran through the building, so it was terrible. But No, for the rest of it, you did guard duty and all sorts of things like that, which were sometimes a laugh, but sometimes they weren't terrible. But anyway, so from there, sorry, I'm rambling a bit. So from there, I was then posted. I'd finished my training, and I was posted, and I was posted, seconded to the RAF regiment, which is a very different crowd of people to the RAF. They blow up airfields and they do all sorts of naughty things, you know, to sort of to dissuade the enemy from, you know, sort of taking over airfields. They had mines, airfields. And there it was a real eye-opener. I met some really, really interesting guys. And again, it was a lot of it was to do with film. It was to do with going to university. It was to do with putting off getting their national service out of the way. Then they could go on and do their university course, which they'd already qualified for. They would just put it on hold to go and do those things. And I mean, extraordinary. I met one guy who was he was a very, very rich farmer's son, and you probably won't remember, but in 1949, Jaguar produced a car called the XK120, and it was the most extremely iconic. They now cost 100 grand if you want to buy one, but they were iconic sports cars. They were total glamour, you know, sort of sweeping lines, beautiful. And he had one, and he wasn't supposed to have one, but he kept it in the local town in Dumfries. He kept it in a lock-up garage, and he and I used to go out riding in this car, not picking up girls, but because there wasn't any room for girls in the back. But he used to go around sort of showing off and doing things like that, and I can't tell you that they had such a different attitude towards life. These people, you know, they didn't come from a small back street in Leytonstone, you know, and but I'm not saying they were better people, but they opened your eyes to all sorts of things, you know, movies and art, you know, music, all sorts of things, which were kind of different, that suddenly you found very attractive, you know. But then, what happened after that was that I was supposed to go on then to another part of the course, which was at St Athan in Wales, which is on Beaufort's guns, you know, those pop guns, you know. And they said, no, you can't go, you've got a scar in your eardrum, and if we send you there, there's a chance that it will make it worse, so we're going to discharge you. And by this time, national service was coming to an end anyway. It was all being phased out. So that was very peculiar. They sent me to Blackpool, to a hospital in Blackpool for observation. And so nothing happened. I just went to this hospital in Blackpool, and I used to get up every day, put my clothes on and go out into the town and just hang around, you know, do nothing. And then after about 10 days of observation, I was sent back to my unit at Dumfries, and there I handed in my uniform, got my discharge papers, and that was it. I was sent off. Well, I had a 3 months pension, you know, which so I could, before I could find work when I got back into Civvy Street. Yeah, but then I stayed in touch with a few of the people that I knew in the Air Force that I'd been very friendly with, and I started meeting up with them, going to the West End, and hanging around in coffee bars. Then it was, because it was all coffee bars, and then getting the odd bit of work as a crowd on a film unit or something, you know, with this guy Frank Blacker, and yeah, so it was good fun. But it was when all that started to happen. That people, I was still drawing and stuff, not as much as I had been, and the idea of going to art school was suddenly very attractive. You know, it was a sort of, you know, very bohemian, glamorous, you know, thing to do. Not glamorous, but exciting thing to do, and that's when I started going to evening classes at St Martin's, you know, before I went to art school proper. But hanging around in the West End an awful lot at that time, you know, in Wardour Street and Old Compton Street, and going to coffee bars, and didn't drink very much. It was very odd. You didn't drink so much in those days, you know, but it was more, you know, just sort of social activities really, and hanging around. But you did rather make a bit of a thing of it, you know, that here I am, and this is where I am, and this is what I'm doing, you know. It was a bit like that, the old sort of slightly bohemian sort of existence, you know, yeah. But to get there, it wasn't that simple, because it was, strangely enough, it was like in Leader's interview, it was a question of that you had to go back to your local county education committee and seek was got a major county award, which I think is what Leader applied for. But I could only get a major county award if I went to Colchester or Chelmsford, to an art school in Essex, because it was Essex County Council. And that wasn't glamorous enough for me. You know, I was going to evening classes at St Martin's, and I met a guy at St Martin's called Don Heffron, and he said, "But you're not bad. You're really quite good. You should go permanently to art school." And he said, "Go to Goldsmiths. It's not rated very much as an art school, because it's part of the University of London. It's not actually a simple art school, not like Canberra or the college or one of those." And so off I went, you know, with my folder of bits and pieces, and had an interview, and they said, yeah, sure, fine, you know, do it, but you've got no grant, you'll have to find your own financing. But apart from that, yes, you can start here in September. Another friend of mine decided to go with me, and I don't know how I got that arranged, but anyway, it's a guy called George Popperwell, who's now an art teacher. I think he's just still alive in New Zealand, and he's published a couple of books on that. And George and I ended up going into Goldsmiths at the same time, but we had to have somewhere to live, so we found a one-room right at the top of a crazy old house on Deptford Broadway, and we had this one room with 2 single beds, with 12 and 6pence a week it was, and so we shared that and paid half each. But to earn our money, we didn't have to, but we went to work at Lyons. Joe Lyons, you remember Joe Lyons? Well, they had delivery lorries that used to deliver all their cakes and bread around the different shops all around London. And near to us, not like too far down the road, they had a depot where they loaded the trucks for the next morning, which was all those blue lorries all with gold painting on and stuff. And we got jobs loading the lorries 2 hours a night, from sort of 6:30 to 8:30, just loading these lorries with cakes and trays of cakes and bread and all sorts of things. And that's how we lived. We were down our, sort of 10 or 12 hours work a week. But we earned enough to buy a little bit of old Holborn and eat. Oh, we used to go to an army surplus store in Deptford, where you could buy tinned food for nothing, which was all left over from the war and all sorts of things. So we used to live a lot on that, and fish and chips on Friday. But it was marvellous, because then you went and you did, you were just involved with so many other people, and they all had all their ideas, about how they were going to do things, what they did and all the rest of it. And you worked as much as you could at home. But there was quite a bit of discipline involved in the art school then. It wasn't as free and easy as it is now. We had to do so many 2.5 hours life drawing every week. And we had to go in on Saturday mornings and do life drawing. But so for the first year, you did life drawing, you did painting, and you did wood carving, not wood carving, stone carving. You had optional things, like any university thing, you picked up a couple of things, and then you may drop them in your third year, so you went on, so you ended up in your final year doing fine art, basically. But I quit after 2 years. I only went up to intermediate. and then I got interested in other things really. Not so much the more lifestyle things and travelling, things like that. But it was wonderful being at Goldsmiths because the facilities were just amazing. Everything was given over to your education. That there was a marvellous library. There was all sorts of shop you could buy things from at discounted rates, so your materials cost you less. There weren't many parties, but you used to go to the pub a lot. There was a local pub just up the road from Goldsmiths called the Rosemary Bush. Usually ended up there if you had any money. That was, so various people some people rich and some people were on grants and some people like us just worked in the evenings and things, to actually do it. But it was hard to be working sort of 5 nights a week for 2.5 hours, I used to eat a few cakes, so. I don't know. One time I counted up that I had something like 60 jobs, and they ranged from packing ladies' underwear to packing law books. I worked as a tea blender's assistant down on the docks in London. Extraordinary things. But packing in Great Portland Street was another job I did, which was in the fashion trade. I worked at ITN, but that was later, doing syndication. Dozens of things, that I just did. And the worst job I had was a bread delivery man. You delivered bread between sort of 2 o'clock and 5 o'clock in the morning, and it was awful. People were just so awful to you, that you might get a cup of tea, but you had to stand outside on the pavement and drink it. It was terrible, like that. But of the odd things, I think the most exotic was the tea blends. What else did I do? Loads of things. A lot of the jobs was to do with packing. Because it was easy to get a job. I was a very good packer. It was very easy to get a job packing things, But just trying to think, yeah. I can't think offhand. I might be able to come up with something else later, but I know I had them all written down at one time. So I was living with some friends of mine in is it not Swiss Cottage? Was it Chalcott Road, and Camden, North Camden, and they decided that they wanted. He was Irish. He was from Cundorcan in Dublin, and they decided that they'd go and live in Ireland and live the good life and do self-sufficiency. And they were coming over on a trip, and they said, "Oh, would you want to come along for the ride?" So I thought, well, why not? I'd never been to Ireland. Yeah. So I think the thing that sort of impressed me was driving down from Cork. We got off the ferry and drove down from Cork. Was coming down into Rosscarbery because it was so beautiful. Coming across the causeway, you know where I mean, where the water on both sides and the town in the background and everything. It was just so amazingly beautiful. And the other thing was that there's no traffic. There was no cars on the road. It was not sort of full of maniacal activity, as it seemed to me. And we ended up going to this woman in North Street, Mrs. Hayes, who I later had a lot more contact with later in life on my return. But then we spent 2 weeks being shown round the county, all round Skibbereen and West Cork, looking at empty houses and dilapidated houses and things like that. And I was struck so much by the kind of the ease of it all. It seemed so easy for me to just take it all in and appreciate what it was like. And it also did, of course, remind me of the Hertfordshire in the 40s, which was very, very rural society. It's not now, but it was then, very rural. And that the pace of life was so much slower. And also I thought, well, this is really good. You can buy a house for £3,000. I can never be able to do that in London. And I thought, and then gradually the idea that why didn't I come back and and have a look myself at houses and things. But anyway, we looked at all these various houses. They eventually found something they liked, and we stayed for a while and toured around. Went to Bantry and did all the local things that you do. Castle Townsend particularly were down there, and I still liked it very, very much. So eventually that came to an end, went back, and so I decided that I would come down and have a look on my own. I'd come back another time, just on my own, which I did, and stayed with Mrs. Hayes in North Street again. I met up with Charlie McCarthy, the estate agent, and we spent a couple of days together just driving around, looking at houses and things like that. And eventually I did find a place, you know, on the Cork Road, this house on the Cork Road, which was for sale. And so then I thought, well, went to the bank. I think, yeah, that's right. First of all, I went to the bank and they said that they would advance me the money to buy it and the house would be security. And it was very cheap. I think it was £4,000 or less than that. And so I thought, well, I've got to pay for this. So I went back to London and then I worked for Tristan Fry, the L.W. Hunt drum company, and earned quite good money doing that and paying off the loan on the house. So I didn't pay it all off completely. I paid off quite a lot of it. And then in the end, the friends were talking about actually going off, instead of going off to Ireland, they were going to go to Australia, going to retire to Australia. As I say, eventually I just loaded up my car with as much stuff as I could carry, you know, with didn't have canvases, but I had loads of boards and paint and cap brushes and records and all sorts of stuff. And I got as far as Wales, where it nearly all ended, when I just broke down at the side of the road, the engine blew up completely, irrevocably, at the side of the road in Wales. And so I sat there for a while, trying to decide that this isn't very good. What shall I do? Perhaps I'll go to France instead. But eventually I got towed into a local garage, and the guy was very strange, and eventually I found that he was called Roy John James, which I believe was one of the great train robbers. Well, he wasn't, he was one of the drivers of the great train robber. And he said, well, I don't want to talk to you now, but I'll talk to you tomorrow. There's a pub just down the road and you can get down there and you'll get a bed for the night and chicken in a basket. And so nothing I could do about that. And he had on the site by the garage, he had a caravan, which was his office. So duly at 8:30, 9 o'clock next morning, I turned up and knocked on the door and went and I sat in this caravan for perhaps 2 hours, right? And all these odd people came in, transactions took place of some kind or another, and I was totally ignored. Till after about, do you imagine what it was like sitting there but waiting for someone to talk to me and say, well, what do you want to do? And then he said, okay, I'll take your car, I'll swap, you give me 50 quid and I'll give you, I'll swap your car for a going car, you know, so you continue your journey. So I got this Cortina, the old Cortina, and did the thing. I loaded all the stuff from my old car back into that one and set off for the ferry, and they're very kind on the ferry. They let me, I didn't have to pay any more, although I'd missed the ferry the night before. They let me change the booking, and I drove, and in the morning I drove off the ferry and the exhaust fell off. The back half of the exhaust fell off, so I managed to actually squeeze that into the car and set off for Skibbereen, and that's where I ended up in North Street, Skibbereen, at Mrs. Hughes's bed and breakfast, and started to think about what I was going to do, because I didn't really know what I was going to do. So I stayed there for perhaps 3 or 4, 5 weeks. And she had lots and lots of people who wanted jobs done and decorating and odd jobs done and things. And that's what I did. I stayed at the house, but she was very kind to me and she let me live there on a weekly basis. You know, I just had to get my own breakfast and just pay so much a week, which is about half of what she would normally charge. And then eventually I met someone who wanted to share a house in Lep. Needed someone to share the house with him, and I moved in there, and I was starting. Then it was getting better, and so things were really looking up, and I was feeling a lot better about the whole thing. I didn't like the house I'd bought, so eventually I sold that, but not then. That was not for a long time afterwards. But then I settled in at Capana, which was the house in Lep. And I started painting there. That's where I started. And that's when things started to take off. And there's quite a lot of paintings which were to do with my life in London, like figures in interiors, lots of things like that, you know, which were really kind of London based, you know, and figures in the street, stuff like that. And it was okay, but it wasn't really working out. It wasn't going that well. And so then I started to think about doing landscape painting, which I'd never done before in as such landscape painting. And I did a couple of things, and one of the paintings I did was now I can see it in my mind's eye, was fairly grey painting, but fairly looking way across open landscape towards Bantry, it was called. And I thought it was quite good. I thought this is quite nice. And so I sent it off to an exhibition in Cork, at the Cork Craftsmen's Guild. It wasn't a proper gallery, it was the Craftsmen's Guild. And they sold it straight away. And so I started to do other things at Lep. I was worked away, and I was just explaining there was one big sitting room, because it was quite a big country house. Well, not country house, but quite a big house. And it had a great big sitting room with a grand piano, which nobody used. So I took it over as a studio, and I worked there for quite a long time. And I actually did the first exhibition I did in Forrester's Gallery in Bandon, was all done in that house. Yeah, it was all done in that house. And then that exhibition went very well. So I was sort of not established, but at least it was, strange enough, it was opened by Charlie McCarthy, the estate agent. So I thought, well, he may all know a few people who fight along. And he bought 2 paintings, you know, which he's still got in his house. And so that really established what I was going to do. And then I suppose about a year or so later, I met Penny. And there is a story about how we got together, but it was partly because she had a bookshop in Skibbereen, and she used to ride, she had no insurance, so she used to ride her moped down to Lep and leave it in the garage where I was staying for the day, and then she'd hitchhike into town to open the bookshop. And so it became a regular thing that we'd have a cup of tea either when she arrived to go to leave her moped, or on her way back from work she'd come in and have a cup of tea. And so that grew from that, and then eventually we got together. Unfortunately, the guy that I shared the house with, he was a very nice guy sometimes, but he didn't like the idea of me getting together with Penny. He felt very possessive of my company, and so that never really worked out. But eventually it was okay. But so we moved into a little cottage just on the Glandore Road, and we lived there for about a year. Was it a year we stayed? I think it was. And then some people told us about another house that was for sale, very cheap. But when we went to look at it, it was absolutely beautiful. situation in a little hollow on a beautiful field, south facing, with loads of trees and things. But it was a total and absolute ruin. There was no roof. There was about 4 foot of earth inside the house, no windows. The window apertures were there, but there were no windows. And the gables were a bit rocky. And so then, all the time we lived at Drown, at the little cottage on Glandore Road. I was out every day at sort of 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock in the morning, clearing the house and emptying and just working on. And I think it took us about a year before we were able to actually get a roof on it and make it sort of semi-habitable. But it was quite. You could see in some of the old photographs that there's you can see the rafters and inside the roof, but there's no insulation, no lining to the ceiling. We just had plastic over the windows, and but we did have somewhere to sleep, and we did have a kitchen and an old Rayburn cooker, which kept us warm, and so we stayed there for 3 years, and in the end, it was a beautiful house in the end. But during that time, then I made the studio upstairs so that I had somewhere to work, and we both worked away. Penny was working, and I was working as much as possible, and when I was gardening or doing building work, and that was then the second exhibition came up at Forrester's exhibition, Forrester's Gallery in Bandon, and that was quite successful. And then it was opened by Hugh Coveney, who was a government minister at that time, and he really liked the work, and he bought a couple of pictures and a few other people, and so it grew in that sense that I wasn't making a fortune. But we were getting by. We were managing, and then that later all led on to into going to Zurich to the Island 85, the 8 Irish artists. But at the time, which we haven't broached at all, but at the time we were both involved in the West Cork Arts Centre, because I'd talked to Hugh Coveney about getting it rented to form the Skibbereen Art Society and Gallery. And he talked to somebody who talked to somebody, and so eventually, we got it for a peppercorn rent. We'd actually formed a committee and got it for a very cheap rent. And part of all that was that evening classes. So I was teaching evening classes. Penny was teaching children, doing all sorts of things with kids there, part-time, which was very successful. We did some amazing schemes and things. And then I went on doing that for 2 or 3 years. So what with the bookshop and the evening classes, we were selling the odd picture. We were doing okay, we were surviving quite well. Yeah. I don't know where the interest in cars came from, but because when I was that sort of age, 11, 12, 13, 14, there weren't any cars. In our street there were 2 cars, one belonged to the doctor and one belonged to the photographer who did the wedding photographs. But it was a bit later, I suddenly started, cars started arriving, new cars, after the war. People started manufacturing things again and they looked so different to the cars they'd produced before the war that I got interested. But it was just a general interest in cars, really. And then around about the age of, I suppose, 18, I can't remember exactly, 17 or 18, this guy offered me this car which had belonged to a doctor. And it was a 1938 Triumph Dolomite convertible with 2 dicky seats in the boot. and of course I was living in Soho at that time, and there were no parking restrictions, and so you could just park anywhere you like. So it was fine. I used to drive around with various of my sort of Soho buddies sitting in the passenger seat, sort of lording it around, driving around Soho and down Regent Street in our convertible. And it lasted a while, but eventually it broke down, and I couldn't afford to repair it. But then the interest stayed with me a long time after that, and a great friend of mine's brother was starting to race minis, and he'd had a lot of bad luck with people fixing the cars up, and then they'd break down on the track, and then he'd waste all this money having it all done. So he said to me, "I'll tell you what, I'll pay for it, or if you do it." So I went down to, he had a place down in Ottershaw in Surrey. Went down, brought the car back on a trailer, and lodged it into a lock-up garage, and then I worked on it for about 9 years, and then we took it racing. And I did a bit, I was racing a bit, but really not good enough, really, not competitive enough, really. So my friend, who I was in a partnership with, Robert, he started racing. He was as mad as a hatter, and we started winning things, And so then, of course, he was prepared to put more money in, and we got better equipment and better. So we did it for 2 years, but that was enough, because then motor racing is like gambling. It's, unless you got a backer, it'll break you financially. You just find yourself in terrible debt, and there's always something else, another 70 quid for this, another 80 quid for tyres, another. So it packs it in, basically. But I've never lost that interest, and since being in Ireland, I've restored 2 cars. One was a 68 Mini Cooper S, which I got in a box of bits in different boxes of bits from a guy in Nottingham, and I rebuilt that totally from scrap to on the road, and eventually sold it to some guys who wanted to go historic rallying in Belfast. Yeah, so we just sold it to him. It cost me 800 quid, I think, for the whole thing, and I sold it for 5,000 something for the rallying car. And then I got a Lotus Cortina, which I dearly loved that car, but I couldn't afford to hang on to it, really, because we were in transition then of moving houses, trying to decide what to do with our lives and things like that. So I did it up, I got it running and I got it rolling and everything, but eventually I sold it. But I still maintain an interest in motor racing. I watch a lot of it on television. It's sort of, I find the technical side of it very interesting too, with what's happening with all the things that are happening that they're discovering, that they use now. We have electric cars, and a lot of it is to do with motor racing. That's about it, really. With the cars. Yeah. And then became aware that there was a local art society that had an exhibition every year in the church hall in Skibbereen. And talked to various people, and they said, well, it's usually very good, and it's hung by the guy who was the art teacher at the college in Skibbereen, very nice man called Brian Aldridge. They'd come from England many years ago, but he'd been teaching in Skibbereen, and so we decided that we would both put pictures into this exhibition hall, because it was all open. There was no hanging committee. You could just put stuff in it, be put on. And Brian always did a really good job of putting up flats and putting up a false ceiling and muslin ceiling, making it very attractive. And it was such a social event that you didn't realise. The first time we went, we were quite surprised, because there's a nice little walk up past the church where no parking. We walk up towards the hall, and you come around the hall, and there's the silver band playing everybody into the exhibition, and everything was done on a very sort of friendly local level, and you met all sorts of people. There was this vicar from Ballineen with his paintings, which were called Cheese and Trees, which he painted cheese and trees, and Percy Hall's wife used to row over with his pictures from Hare Island in the rowing boat to get them in on time for the exhibition opening. but many other people. And it was a great mixture of professional, semi-professional and amateur artists. And everybody got together and made a lovely evening. And there was wine. John Field provided sort of sausage rolls and wine and generally things like that. And Flower Club did the flowers, which was really lovely. And so, but you can understand how everybody got involved. The whole of the community got involved in doing this as an annual event. And just at the same time as that, they used to have this other thing which tied in with it loosely, which was called Welcome Home Week. And there used to be a special plane that came from London and a couple of other places which brought the Irish people from Skibbereen back to Skibbereen. Usually there was a committee that met them at the airport in Cork, and then they'd come down and there'd be a whole series of events that centred around Welcome Home Week. And they used to have proper things, you know, musicians, concerts, all sorts of stuff. And the Art Society happening, the thing was all part of that, you know, so that was what made it so interesting. You met lots of other people who were from Skibbereen but had come back for their holidays, basically, is what they did, yeah. So it was a great pleasure and a great, you know, such an enjoyable thing to look forward to at that time. So it was about that time I was working away and started to send work off to sort of major invitational exhibitions or needed hanging to qualify for them. And the exhibition of visual art in Dublin, in Limerick rather, which was an annual thing which you took submissions from all over the country for artists getting, and they had generally invited an eminent artist from another country. And on one particular occasion it was this girl who well, she wasn't an artist, she was a museum curator. And she chose all the work for Limerick. I got 2 pictures into that exhibition. Other things that were going on was the annual exhibition at the Royal Hibernian Academy in Dublin. I got 2 pictures into there on 2 different occasions. Yeah, Claire Morris Open exhibition, which is more towards the north when I was in there too. I can't remember all the exact pictures, but I can remember a few of them that I went to. I went to the EVA opening once or twice, and we went to the Royal Hibernian Academy opening because that was just a laugh. You just go up and on what they call varnishing day, where you have like a preview of the exhibition. They do it at the Royal Academy still in London, and theoretically you go up there to varnish a picture, because you don't. You go up there to see who's there and to get a couple of free glasses of wine and hang around for a bit. So we did that, and then we did an exhibition at Cork Airport, which ran for quite a few weeks during the summer at Cork Airport. And what's the other one we did? Oh yeah, banquet exhibition for the Lord Mayor in Cork. Did that, and yeah, but they were good things to do because they made you feel like you're actually making some progress in the art world rather than just sort of sitting at home painting your pictures in what was virtually the attic. You know, it was really the studio, it was like the attic, and just putting them out there and just seeing what happened. But it was good. And then it was, I suppose in 1984, we received this approach from this Christian Tischhaus, who was a headmaster of a school in Zurich, and his idea was that he'd wait 8 people from West Cork, artists and craftspeople, to go to Zurich and set up an exhibition, to bring a cultural exhibition, not just art and craft, but cultural as well, various things and happenings through the town in Zurich. And that took a lot of organisation, but he was absolutely brilliant at it. He was really the strength behind it all. And eventually we did a sort of slight preview in '85 in May. We did a preview of the exhibition, was at the Crawford Gallery, the municipal gallery in Cork, which wasn't all the work, but it was some of the work, so it obviously had been too much. And then it was all packed up and all responsibility was taken out of our hands, and all we had to do was turn up and go, and receive a really lovely welcome from the people in Zurich. And we all had host families to go and stay with for the 3 weeks that we were there. And generally speaking, the exhibition was a big success. One of the few complaints that we had to people that the pictures were too cheap, and so but I sold a few things. Pat Connor from Skull, brilliant sculptor, and he sold quite a lot of work, you know, but everybody expected him to. But generally, yeah, and Wrighties, they sold quite well. Ian and Linny Wright, they did quite well. But it was good fun. We had lots of trips out to restaurants and trips up to the mountains and all sorts of wonderful activities. And the weather was lovely because it was May into June in Zurich. It's really beautiful. You know, all the blossoms out on the trees, and it was just really stunning. But what is really stunning is they say something's going to happen, and it happens. Do you know what I mean? It's sort of like, you know, that they are so efficient, but they're still nice. You know what I mean? They're not efficient and horrible. They're really nice, but you couldn't get over how regularly the trams came past. They said the tram's going to come past at 2 minutes past 11, and it would arrive at 2 minutes past 11. You know, so that was rather different to Ireland, where you might wait, you know, half an hour late for a bus. You know, that they had to stop to drop off some milk crates in Bandon and didn't get to you until 25 to 10 or something, you know. But that's okay, that's fine, that's how it works. Right, so it was shortly after I got back from Zurich, and we found this other house which was near the river, near the Illen River, and which a friend of ours had told us about, and we thought he was going to buy it, and said how amazing it was. And we really, at that time, we were quite happy where we were. We'd got the garden together, everything was working, and they said, well, we'll go and have a day out on the Sunday. We'll go and have a look at it. And we did, and it was just the most amazing place. So that was very, very overgrown. You could hardly get to the back door of the house, and but it was lovely flat fields around it. Land was edged by the river, and we thought, well, what can we do? It was just beyond our possibility. We phoned up our rich friend in Bristol, and he was currently changing businesses into a work takeover, and he wouldn't lend us the money. We tried a couple other people, still couldn't get any money. Someone introduced us to a member of a bank a manager of a bank in Cork, who owed him a few favours, but that didn't pay off either. And then suddenly, out of the blue, these people turned up and wanted to buy our house, and so it was like, I don't know, like something from heaven. It just all fallen into place, so I had to. No, that was just before I went to Zurich. That's right, and then of course it all went through, and we sold the house, got the money, but I had to go to Zurich, so left Penny had to move all our stuff from one house to the next, and so that's where we ended up, back at the beginning again with the house that needed a huge amount of work. The only tap was at the back door, you know, it was outside at the back door. I don't think there was any toilet facilities, no, there weren't at all, and it was just too hard to resist what the possibility was with this house. You know, apart from about an acre of land, and then we had this enormous garden, which I suppose is about 150 feet by 200 feet, and it was a badger garden, and it was just completely taken over by badgers. The whole thing was one huge badger set, and it was just absolutely amazing. You can't believe how wonderful that was, you know. So we protected the badgers, said that nobody was allowed to come up there and interfere with them, and we eventually took a long time to buy the house, because the the solicitor was sitting on his hands and not dealing with it. And what had happened then, we got the surveyor in, and he said, well, the people on the left-hand side, Bessie Appleby was the neighbour, on the other side was another neighbour, and so they said what bit, because it was huge, it had been a very big farm, and they wanted this bit, and Bessie wanted that bit, we wanted this bit, so that went on and on and on. But he did include the island in the river, that we could have that in our portion of land. And that proved to be such a blessing with the kids and everything, because they all learnt to swim, the local kids, you know, with their neighbours' children, they all learnt to swim in the river. And now Hannah learnt to swim in the river, Penny learnt to swim in the river. So it was really, it was just a magical time really, and it just turned out to be built. There was a studio there, there's several barns and things which we took over. And all sorts of stories were attached to that, you know, that people used to come up there and hunt the badgers, and we took away all the traps and made it so they couldn't get in there. We used to get flooded perhaps once or twice a year, not actually in the house, but cut off from the road because the river started filling up, went all round the back of us. So we'd end up on an island, his house on the island, and it was just, I mean, you couldn't make that into a story for the way it all worked out for a book, you know. And the Paddy's donkey, the story about Paddy's donkey, where we woke up in the night because he was making such a row in the night, so we got up to go and find out what was happening, and he was stranded on the edge of a field, and the flood was gradually getting higher and higher, and we had to get dressed and go out there with a torch and knock down a section of a wall and grab hold of him and pull him over the wall. And I think we had trying to tempt him back with carrots over the wall, which was great. And then the next day we tried to get him back into the field, and he was absolutely having nothing to do with it whatsoever. He just dug four hooves into the grass and you couldn't shift him. So we had in the end to get Paddy, who the donkey belonged to, had to get him to come up and collect him. But yeah, there's so many stories about Cornaclay that it's hard to, you know, think back, you know, how magical it all was, and how fishing, used to go fishing in the evenings, used to have people, parties we had there, had an exhibition there, which went very well. So, all those things were so, I don't know, sort of idyllic in a way, I suppose, yeah. But yeah, it's grand. In the last 35 years has been down to Penny, because I'm a bit of I'll just go along with what's happening, really. When it comes to building and houses and things like that, is that quite often I will work hard at it, because I see it as a challenge. I want to make a statement about it. So if we do a house up, or do a garden up, or build a cottage in the garden for Hannah or whatever it is, you know, I do it. I'm approaching it from that point of view all the time. It's not. I know it's not always laudable to be like that, but it is like I want to prove it's the best thing I can do. That I can do it, you know, sort of thing. There's a challenge for me. Those things really. That's all I can say about that, really. But it's the same, is that I look out that wall, and I would never have built that. I'd never got the man in to build it. But Penny wanted to do it, and she's done it, and it looks fantastic. You know, it's just everybody loves it. They all come along and admire it, and say, "Oh, where'd you get those from?" And, you know, they came from India. You know, and it's sort of it's a change. She's brilliant at making changes. You know. Which I'm not really. I just go into my studio and work away for 4 hours and demand a cup of tea, really. That's it.